I have not heard that before, but hey, welcome back to the Group Project Podcast. This is episode number 68, and I am here with Dr. Basil Marin from Atlanta, calling in from Atlanta, Georgia here. So uh, we had some technical difficulties again. I apologize. I hope I do not echo too much. I'm at home today recording here, but it seems like we got a good connection here. So, Dr. Marin, thank you so much for making it work here so we can have this conversation, the meeting of the minds, like you said in our pregame here. So,
Yes,
welcome.
Dr. Smith, I appreciate you. Listen, I think this has been my motto in the last, definitely last 13 months, where kids will come to us with the concerns with their Chromebooks, teachers. I mean, they have multiple screens, and I think this it speaks to the resilience the educators and administrators have had to have at all different levels of working through. So definitely, I'm happy to say we powered through. We made it to start the podcast.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Resilience. I think you said that word. I totally agree. Our teachers are making it work, man. Us administrators got to make it work too here.
That's
So,
right. That's
um,
right.
so here's the background. Episode 50, I interviewed the joyful leader herself, Bethany Hill, and she was like, there's this guy that is just amazing. His name is Basil Marin. I'm sorry. And he's doing some great things. And right when that show ended, I'm like, I got to figure out who this guy is. So I followed you on Twitter. And then I'm like, this guy is just popping up everywhere. He's doing chats. He's doing podcasts. He's just finished up his doctorate. I'm like, I got to get this guy on. He just seems like a natural born leader here that's just doing some great things down in Atlanta. So let me read a little bit of your bio here, and then I'm just going to let you share kind of your background here.
Okay.
Assistant principal at Chambly. Did I say that right?
Chambly, yeah, yep.
Charter High School located in Atlanta. He's been there for 2 years. Before that, he was an AP in Virginia. Just got his PhD from Old Dominion. That tweet blew up on Twitter that you had of getting that and kind of being proud about that, which was awesome.
Yes,
You were the
sir.
teacher of the year back in 2017 in the, I guess it was SCEP Chesapeake
Yes,
Center.
C-STEP. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Alternative school.
Huge following. So anyways, man, I will hand it over to you. Welcome. And just share kind of your background, your leadership, your journeys, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So again, first, thank you so for having me on this podcast. You've had some phenomenal rock stars in education, people who are doing the work every day, all day. And so I appreciate Bethany as well, my sister in this work, for giving me the plug and appreciating the work that I'm doing, and again, vice versa, appreciating the work that she does. Kind of beginning off a little bit about me. Some people may not know, but if they follow me for a while, they know that I actually, Jared, was an alternative school student myself. My dad is a pastor, and so if you know anything about pastors' kids, which are also referred to as PKs, we can be the poster children for tearing some things up. So that was kind of me, kind of growing up. I mean, I the rough kids in the school that just are not trying to do right. I mean, that was me. So I got sent to two different alternative schools because of my behavior. And I know we're gonna get into one of my mentors, Dr. Shara Talley, later. But she used to run a program at my dad's church every Wednesday called Young Achievers, and she was a professor at James Madison University, and she taught African American studies, and she could not stand that Black History Month was really only taught in the month of February in the public school system, and that's the only time we hear about it. And so every Wednesday we learned about Black history, who the not the you have like the Fave Five, famous inventors, but really going deep and seeing who really has really gave the foundation for the things we interact every day, who's really paved the way, W.E.B. Du Bois, for education, and just really understanding more about our history. And so she had that every Wednesday. And so while I was, in high school and trying to get my life together, trying to figure it out right, I had a ninth grade teacher after being in an alternative school named Miss Kathy Sankson, who she had a classroom full of black and Hispanic boys, right? And I
Mhm.
remember the first day of school. I'm in a traditional high school now. They're trying to give me maybe I wouldn't even say a second chance, a third chance. And I just remember her walking in, and white woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, and I remember thinking, her work is cut out for her. I said, because we're a handful. And I just remember thinking, looking around and seeing my buddies, and I'm like, we've been tracked, our whole lives. I knew all these kids, and I tell the joke that they put all of us together so the rest of the school could have a chance to learn. And so I just remember she treated me different. She just, everything I did, Jared, she was on me like all the time. She called my parents. I couldn't do anything wrong. And the problem of having, I would say, like the ecosystem, like the classroom we had, was that you have a kid like me who really wasn't the toughest kid, but you're now in an ecosystem where you got to try to really show who's the hardest in the class and who's the toughest. And so a
Mhm.
kid like me, I would curse her out, I'd throw a chair and try to seem
Man.
tough, and I would get in trouble, suspended, ISS. And so, she really, every time I got sent out of the classroom for whatever it was, she would look at me, Jared, when I came back, and she would say, Basil, no matter how dirty your past is, your future is always spotless. And she just was always on me. And so I'll
Mm.
be very clear. I've always struggled with reading and writing my whole life. Even in second grade, we moved from California to Virginia when I was the age of 9. I'm oldest of 4, and I was in second grade reading on the kindergarten reading level. And that's a statistic and some knowledge, Jared, that we see across the nation. Just our
Mm.
black and brown boys who are illiterate and don't have the skills,
Mhm.
and those academic deficiencies follow them, right?
Mm.
So we talk about me having struggles in school that really stem from me having academic deficiencies. I just, I didn't want to be called out to read. I don't want to, if I saw that was coming and I was next in line, I'm going to do something to get put out of the classroom because I'm
Mhm.
not trying to read. So those things followed me. So I got myself together. My junior year, I'm in again regular class. I passed the SOL, Standards of Learning, which is a class you must pass to graduate. And I just remembered Miss Sankson walked past my door. I was not in her class anymore, but she walked past, and I just had this. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Glory with Denzel Washington, but I remember she walked past, and I had just got the results of the SOL that I passed, and this one big tear decided to roll down my
Huh.
face, and I said, "Man, if it wasn't for her, like I wouldn't be where
Wow.
I'm at right now." And so going back to Dr. Talley and her work, she talked about, my both of my parents are from the country of Belize, so they're not from the United
Huh.
States. They both moved there later. And so when you have parents that are like that, no fault of their own, they just don't know the educational system. So Dr. Talley's asking me in my junior year, "Hey, have you taken the SAT or the PSAT?" And I'm looking at her like, "The what?" And she's like, "The SAT." And I'm like, I haven't sat anywhere. What are you asking me?" And I'm like, and she's like, the thing the test to be able to go to college is a precursor. And I'm like, Dr. Tyler, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Wow.
And she's like, your counselors haven't talked to you all, like, come into classrooms or had assemblies and giving you literature about SATs. I'm like, no, ma'am. And so I remember she said, okay, tomorrow you're gonna go to your counselor and you're gonna ask him for this waiver form, because you said you get free and reduced price lunch. I'm like, yeah. She's like, all right, well, you'll get this waiver and you'll be able to have your test paid for. So Jared, I go in the next day. I asked for the form. They gave me the ticket to come back during my lunchtime. I go into the counselor's office at the time, and I said, "Hey, I'm coming here to get this form." And counselors are supposed to have this yearly meeting with you anyway about your advisement and how you're doing.
Mhm.
Again, because I wasn't a kid who was picked it to do well, I didn't have the advisement. So when I went in there on my own to get this paperwork, now she's trying to have advisement, and I'm like, no, no, no. I summoned you today. Like I'm trying to get something from you today. So we're gonna skip all the little things in the conversation. I'm doing fine. I just need to get my SAT paperwork and for me to get the waiver. So Jared, I'll never forget. Again, I'm a junior. She went to her desk to get the paper, and as she's handing it to me, she said, Basil, I have a good friend who works for corporate McDonald's, and he makes 6 figures a year, and he never went to college. So for students who aren't going to college, you don't necessarily need to have this
Mm.
paperwork. And I'm going to start my educational journey there in terms of the work and the inequities I personally face as a student. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do and making sure that all kids have what they need. Because in that moment, I'm gonna use a term: educators, counselors, administrators, teachers can be gatekeepers for why kids don't get what they need, be it their own biases for why they believe kids can't do it, be it their own understanding of what has historically happened in the school. I didn't meet the mold for what she thought was a college ready student, so she felt the need to tell me that. But I would tell you, Jerry, there's a spectrum of students. There's students who their parents grew up in this country, the middle system. They may be a doctor themselves, so they know the system.
Mm-hmm.
So a kid who's like me in the middle, where they kind of halfway know the information. So a kid who has no clue. And I firmly believe if you're a student from the middle to the no clue, the system's not made for you to be successful. And a lot of times it's just the lack of information, or I'll use the word access to information, that really deters students from being successful. So I really, right now, with me having a doctorate, and I could give you all my bio about my being a teacher, being a alternative. So I got my life together, right?
Yeah.
My first job in education, I was a para. Did that for a little while, became a life skills teacher, behavior specialist, got my first master's in special education, did that, enjoyed the work, worked at alternative school, worked with really at-risk kids who were kicked out of public education for verbal and physical aggression. Did that, said I want to be in leadership, started to work on my EDS, to be an administrator, did that while I was teaching full-time, became an administrator, worked on my PhD full-time, and just finished this past year. But I will tell you, someone who was tried and true, and I'm gonna try not to get emotional, is Miss Cheryl Talley. If she did not see something in me back in 2000, what was that? I don't even know. So I'm not gonna do that math for you. But when I was a junior in high school, she didn't start that conversation with me and say, "Hey, I see something," I would not be where I'm at today. And I've had plenty of mentors along the way. But it goes back to looking past students, what they're presenting to you, and seeing the true them. The last thing I'll say before I'll let you kind of, I know you probably want to unpack some
No,
things.
no,
When
no.
I speak nationally, there's a picture I show where there's a kitten looking in a puddle of water, and in the reflection of the water, there's a tiger.
Mm.
And I think that's so profound because Miss Sankson, that ninth grade teacher, when she was speaking to me and when she was talking to me and she was guiding me, she saw the tiger. Even though I still felt like a kitten, I still saw the kitten, I still acted like a kitten.
Mm.
She saw the tiger and spoke to that. And I would say in education, it's our job, it's our diligence, it's our obligation to speak to the tiger that are in kids, even though they're not showing those attributes at that time, because you never know how you're going to impact the kid's life and how you're going to change their life. And so now I'm on a mission to be a disruptor of a status quo and helping kids to get what they need, because I personally am a testament of that. And I shouldn't be a unicorn. So other kids deserve that same opportunity, that same right.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I forgot to mention your bio. He is a keynote speaker as well. And I feel like we're getting a glimpse of some of that keynote speech right now, huh? And now I usually don't bring up people's age, but you said before the show, are you 32? Is that what you said?
Yes, sir, I am.
So you've got I mean, that's young to be already got the PhD under your belt, man.
Yeah,
And, and
it was
so that's
trying.
impressive. I mean, it's just
Thank you.
crazy to come from, the two alternative schools. And I didn't know, I went to your website before I've looked at your Twitter. But I did not know this background. You got a fascinating background about preacher's son. I mean, you got all the makings for like a great movie here, man. I mean, it's awesome.
Yes.
Um, so let's talk about, okay, so you've been an assistant principal for 4 years now, right?
Yes.
What and you can take this from your last 4 years or just the last 2 years where you've been down there in Atlanta. What have been your biggest takeaways from being an AP for these last 4 years? What are some things that you learned that you didn't know before coming in? You've seen a lot, man, both as a student and as a teacher, but what have you learned these last 4 years?
Wow, that's a great question. So the first thing is there's no manual
Huh.
on how to be an administrator. It is, if someone has one that they have documented and collected, please, I will send you my address, because that's the number one thing is really learning. You can have the degree, the credential, but this is a job you kind of learn as you go. And once you've got the different skills, you definitely build upon. But for me, the biggest thing I've learned is um, my leadership is very based on being student centered and being relational, and I've learned, and I've never let that lose sight. And what I will say is I've seen a lot of colleagues, a lot of people, Jared, that get to this level and they forget who they are. Like they forget their why. They forget. what it was like to be in a classroom and to have the struggles. They forget what it meant to, you have a kid who's just giving you the toughest time, and when you turn them over to an administrator, like you're just like, yo, do something. And then you get that, well, no, you got to figure it out. Like I remember that feeling. And so you have to take each opportunity and hear both sides of what's going on. And so my teachers, my teachers and my students both know that I'm going to listen. I care. I want to know the full of what's happening, but I'm going to make the best decision that's in the best interest of the students to be successful. And that may mean there's going to be, when I was in disciplinary role, there might mean there's going to be some discipline, but that might also mean that what's going to be the learning moment during that time. Because again, the root word of being an educator is to educate. And so how are we educating these skills for students? I've been in high school my whole career, for the college and career readiness. Like after they leave us, are they going to be equipped to be able to go to college, to be able to go to the military, to be able to go to the workforce? Are they going to have those skills to be successful? Not just to walk across the stage and graduate, but leave us and be successful beyond that. And so that's what I am intentional about, is saying, how can we make this a teachable moment?
Mm-hmm.
I had one student, my first year being an administrator, that teachers didn't really know how to take me, because I want to hear the story and I want to hear the student side, teacher side. And a lot of times I want it to be a teachable moment. And so they talked about me. You kind of get back to me. They're like, man, he just wants kids to do whatever, and they can talk to him and he'll get out of it. But I had one teacher that came to me one time and said, I think I understand what you're doing. She's like, you're taking on a dad hat, an uncle hat, and you're really giving them the tools, because they're not getting this at home. And I said, that's right. Like when we call the parents, and the parents that says, well, stop calling me, I got calls 5 times this week, they're going to get home and nothing's going to happen, Jared. They're not going to learn from this. They go to a suspension and they come back and nothing was learned. So what do we teach? And sometimes it takes that tough love. So I'm not against that. But sometimes what can we teach them within the schoolhouse to give them what they need? Because that's a teachable moment. And once they understand why things are a certain way, they're not going to do it again. Right. And that can go from being your most challenging student to your top student who fights for you as a teacher. So that for me has been important. So for me, just really staying student centered, remembering my why, and trying to be the administrator that I needed coming up as a student, but also supporting the teachers. And I'll say in this last 6 months, I've just learned so much about SEL. And I've always been an advocate and a component for that. But I'll tell you, Jared, that SEL does not have an age limit. And
I like that.
teachers are coming into the schoolhouse with their own baggage, and you have to be in tune as a leader with your teachers as well. If Miss So and so, Mr. So and so's come to the door and you can just see it on their face that today's not the day, then as a leader you got to know teachers are pouring from empty cups. So hey, Miss So and so, Mr. So and so, let me get you a sub today. Is everything okay? I just truly want to know that you're okay. And if they say, okay, yeah, today I just really am struggling, I'll get you a sub so you can go home, because I want you to be refreshed for tomorrow. And we got to do things like that to make sure our teachers are getting replenished and having what they need. So I've learned a lot, believe me, in these last 4 years about myself. I've learned a lot about what I can withstand and what I can't withstand, a lot of my strengths, some of my weaknesses. But it's understanding that as a leader, it's trial by fire sometimes. And education has changed so much in the years, and it's not just coming on and cutting on the lights and having the keys, but being a true instructional leader and getting kids to where they have to go and moving the instructional needle.
So there's so many different things I want to follow up on there. I love that line. SEL does not have an age limit. I haven't heard that before, man, but I love that. That's so true. The question I was going to ask you was, okay, I was doing the math. So you would have been a junior about 15 years ago. So you had a chance. You were in those alternative schools. You were with some tough kids. You talked about you're trying to be the toughest in the room. And now you're working with some tough kids. Do you feel like the way that we approach kids are kids different these days than they were 15 years ago? Or is it still the same approach, do you feel like? Or what are your thoughts on that? Would you handle a kid the same today as you did if you go back 15 years ago?
It's a yes and no answer, right?
Sure.
Because so much has changed in education over the last 10 or 15 years. Back in the day, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or indifferent, but you could really talk to a kid and like really let them know, like, hey, this ain't it. Like you could really be real. And not saying you can't be real today, but kids just have so much protections, right? Like, and how they're
Mm.
protected, rightfully so, but it's just different. You got to be very tactical on how you handle a student and how you work around it. Kids have rights. School boards have more pressures on them. Principals have more pressures on them. You talk about No Child Left Behind till now. Think about all the policies that have changed.
Mhm.
Back in the day, it was, hey, put them out of school. Now it's like you'll get called by a report of education that says, hey, we used to be at 15%, or no, I'm sorry, we used to be at 35% discipline rates. Now we're at 20. We're creeping back up to 25. What can we do to reduce it? Like, you're getting all kind of, I mean, you're superintendent. You're getting all kind of mandates all over the place
Mhm.
from federal, state, community, stakeholders. So like, you have to navigate all of that.
Mhm.
Um, what I would say is, for me personally, to answer your question, I have a program called My School Sons. And the reason I call it My School Sons is because it takes that level of mentorship to a whole nother level. A lot of schools have different names, Men of Excellence, whatever the names are. They're beautiful programs. But for me, I've seen, Jerry, just again, a lot of these students who are Black and brown males are having that father figure that's missing from the house,
Mhm.
right? And so My School Sons, and I pick the students who have a myriad of challenges. It could be academic, you could be sound behaviorally, but academically, we got to get you on the right track. You might have students that have some behavioral concerns that are really impeding their academic learning, and then you just have a student that needs both. Like, we got to get the behavior before we can even get the academic. And so I handpick those kids based on data, discipline, attendance things. I look at students coming into ninth grade, whatever challenges you had in eighth grade,
Mhm.
let's get it right ninth grade, because that really follows them. And so I had a student one time, Jared, that was in my office. We're working on some schoolwork, and he came to me one time and he said, um, I went out to deal with the parent, and I came back, and he looked at me, Jared, and he said, Dr. Marin, I want to learn how to act white like you. And this was an African American male student. And I looked at him and I'm like, man, we both got pretty good vision. I'm like, I'm not white, dude. And he's like, nah, but you go out there and you handle the parents who are furious and just upset, and you come back in and you've handled it, and and that's acting white. And I had to teach him, like, I said, son, you're in an environment that as a Black male, you're gonna have to learn how to double dutch in this world. You're going to have to learn how to navigate certain things that are for you, against you, and just know how to play both sides. I said, we live, and I keep it real with them. We live in a system that has one constitution but two justice systems. I said, so this is what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to learn how to code switch. I can sit here and talk to you and talk slang all day, and a superintendent walk by and I'm going to change up. He says, yeah, then you could, that's you being fake. I said, no, that's just
Oh.
me being professional, because I know how to double dutch, right? And so even that moment, Jared, who's going to teach a kid that? Like, I wish I knew that when I was 14, 15.
Mhm.
Like, I learned that much later. But if we could give kids the skills now, like, that's just how the real world operates. Those are the type of things that I believe it's my job as a leader. It's our job to make sure we're giving those, again, life skills and skills that they need, that they may not get. And so, yeah, being an administrator is hard. I believe, though, to answer your question, if you have a deep relationship with kids like I do,
Mhm.
specifically in that My School Sons program, I can be
Mhm.
tough on those kids because they know I love them.
Mm.
And it goes both ways. They know if a teacher calls me to a classroom because you're acting up, don't make me walk all the way down the hallway to come address you, because you're not only embarrassing yourself, you're embarrassing me. And they know that. And so when I get there, they're like, man, Dr. Moran, I said, stop talking. Let me figure out what's happening, because when we get back in the office, you already know, because this is not how we operate. But they take that title and take that role seriously because they want that. So that's something, again, I try to give to any role I'm in, but specifically an AP role has been a part of my strengths, I believe.
You've just I mean, we've only been going for about 20, 25 minutes, and you've dropped like so many great lines. That double Dutch line, man, I love that. I love that. Makes so much sense. Um, I was going to ask you, I talked to you. Those of us here in the Midwest don't know much about charter schools. Okay, I'm totally going off on a turn here, but I need to hear from a guy working in a charter school, because I'll be out. There's in the big, I was in Chicago for a period of time. It's all over the place. I'm sure in Atlanta, all over the place. But I'll be honest, here in the Midwest, there's kind of a negative connotation towards charter schools. They feel like there's this, and I don't, I kind of stay out of it, but there's this battle between public schools and charter schools and who gets the money and who gets the funding. So I just want to know from somebody who's working in a charter school, what makes a charter school a charter school? What's the differences? Anything you can share, and maybe it's different in different states. I don't really know,
Yeah.
but anything you can share to enlighten us who don't know much about charter schools.
Okay, so this is my second year in a charter school, and I want to be clear. There's different levels of charter. So Shambo Charter High School I would say it's a half and half public high school / charter. So we still get public funding as well as charter funding. So it's both. There are schools, like you said, you alluded to Chicago, DC, where they're fully charter. And so what that means is they're getting money from a specific pot of money from the United States government, from local agencies, and there's a lot of different benefits you can have because you're not just tied to the federal funding, which has certain mandates that have to happen with it. And so one guy I know, Dr. Perry, I don't know, he has a charter school based out of, I want to say like maybe New York, but I know that he works with very troubled kids or kids who have historically been marginalized, and he has 100% graduation rate.
Wow.
But that also means that there's a lot of different funding going in, but he also could be very intentional about who he hires, the programming he runs, and he doesn't have to go through a board of education to necessarily do everything he wants to do. So if he wants to do it, he can do it. Our school, I'll be honest right now, is going back to a traditional high school. So we are now losing the charter. So there's different, again, mandates. You talk about accreditation for, a district or for schools, like you have to do the same thing for charter. And so if you have the accreditation and you keep it up, you keep your charter. If you do not, you lose your charter. So I would say there are some pluses in terms of like the funding and the money. That's kind of one of the biggest things where you could partner with other universities, other federal, state agencies. Again, you're not tied to it. When you're a district, you got to go through your board and you have to have policies in place, and it just becomes more convoluted. But you also have a steady stream of income coming in from the federal, state, and state. So you don't have to really, every year is not a battle to vie for where you're going to get it or not. But charters have to like really fight for it. So that to me is kind of like a nonprofit. Like you gotta really fundraise and kind of get that money, right? But if you're a school that's doing great things, people want to support that. So for me, it doesn't really impact. Well, it can impact it instructionally if you are chartered and you don't have to listen, you don't have to follow like the state mandates, right? You can have your own curriculum, you can have your own, you have like Montessori schools and different things that are charters. They can kind of, again, do their own thing. So instructionally, it can be a benefit to you as well if you don't want to stick to a curriculum. Financially, it gives you more leeway in certain areas. And then like I know for our school, like one of the perks was we could order from like Amazon, right? But like if you're a public school, I don't think you can unless you have certain bylaws to do that. So again, I would say to me, it still feels like a traditional high school. I don't feel, now again, kids are allowed to wear appropriate clothes according to the school dress code, but you do have charter schools who are like wear uniform, so you got to wear the khaki pants and the polos. I've seen a lot of schools like that in Chicago, a lot of schools like that in DC, where they have a whole mission and vision, and they're very serious about it. So it depends where you are, I would say, geographically, what the mandates are and what the state or that federal region allows. But there are positives, there are perks, but then there are also, I think I will say this out loud, I think there also are charter schools and schools that do lottery systems and select who they want to select. And then I think that's also tied to like modern day segregation. So you kind of got to look at what the program's doing, who are they allowing in, who are they serving, and I have my own take on that. If you're a charter school who's serving the kids who really need it, and you're getting that extra funding in to support the kids, go for it. But if you're excluding people and not having an inclusive environment, and you're seeing that by your trends and who you've supported and who you've allowed to come in, it speaks for itself.
I appreciate you kind of going down that random question there, but we get that question. It's such a polarizing topic up here.
Mhm.
That there's some battle over who's getting what money, and there's just a lot of people don't know much up here about charter schools. So I appreciate that. Hey, I'm at your website right now, basilmarin.com, and I enjoyed kind of reading your about me section. One thing, I love this quote that you have. I think it's by Henry Ford, I think is what it says. And it says, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. So
Mhm.
obviously yeah, Henry Ford here. It's at the bottom of your home page. You must have felt really strongly about that quote to put that in your bio. What is it about that quote? And is there any, you've talked a lot about your failure as a high school student.
Mhm.
Any other, maybe as an adult, failures that have helped open your eyes or helped you grow from those failures?
Absolutely. You know, there's two stories I'll give you. I had a story of when I was doing my master's program, and you have the special education like licensure, right? That you got to take these tests at the very end to see if you're going to be licensed. And I remember I had the RVE, which again, don't remind me what it stands for, but it was the RVE, and there's another exam you had to take. And I just remember I got my results and passed one, but failed the other one. And there was not a testing site close to me. Like I think I had to drive 2 hours to go test.
Oh,
And so I just remember being like, man, I bombed this test. I think I had to pay like $300 for the test. I had to drive 2 hours again, take it again. I just felt crushed, man. I was like, man, this is crazy. And I just remember, going to school the next day and kind of being like, kind of, torp about it, like, man, I got to do this again. And I had a student who was taking the SOL or taking the end of course test, and he failed, right? And he was all down in the dumps. And again, you're a human, we have those things. But I remember in that moment being like, oh, this is a good opportunity to exchange a story. And I
mm-hmm.
kind of looked at him and I'm like, dude, can I share something personal with you? He's like, yeah. And I'm like, I took a test just recently and I bombed mine too. And he was like, you bombed the test? And I'm like, yeah, man, I bombed it. Like I didn't pass it. I was like, well, let me tell you the good news for you. I'm like, this test is free. I had to pay for my test. I had to drive 2 hours to take a test. I had to get a hotel. Like it was a whole ordeal. I
Wow.
said, but I'm gonna have to take it over again. I said, but I now know how it is. I know the experiences. I know what it's like, and so I need to just look at it again and be able to learn from that. I said, but you get a free and of course test that you would take again. And I said, I'm gonna be here to support you. So for me, not only do I share that with my students, but
Mhm.
but it's personal too. I've had my personal ups and downs. The most recent one I'll share, excuse me, is I just recently was in a 2 month process of applying for a principalship at a local high school in this area, and I just got recently told by the superintendent that I didn't get it, and that was a blow. That was a blow because it was a 2 month process. Um, going back and forth. Kind of you start off at first like, oh, I'm not really worried about it, and then you get invested, and then
Oh
and,
yeah.
and then you go to superintendent level and have that conversation. You start to get a little bit more excited. And then they get the call that I was a finalist but didn't get it. Excuse me, that was hard. And so for me, sorry, 1 second. So for me, after I got done, scraping up my bruises and whatnot, I said I posted something on Twitter again that was speaking to the same thing. Was that you know after you dust yourself off and try again, this time you
Mm,
have more experience to do better next time. So
mhm.
that quote has applied for me all of my career, even doctoral program with comps or with doing a paper didn't do as well. Keep going, keep grinding because you never know if you don't continue.
Mhm. You seem like a very reflective person, that you're well, and I appreciate you sharing those stories. Those are not never fun stories to share, but man, the way that you're able to hey, then just that story about talking to the kid who failed his class, his test, and you're able to kind of connect your story there. Um, so I just think that's just a huge. You seem like a very just humble person. Where did that come from? I mean, you had that. is it just having those couple mentors when you were in high school? Is that where that came from? Was there a switch that flipped somewhere in college, or where'd that come from? Just that humbleness and willing to like reflect and say, hey, I'm going to get better because of this.
So to be honest, during my sophomore, so I was again knucklehead, just trying, going through, couldn't see one day from the next. And my sophomore year, I thought I was a friend that, tattoos, was in gangs, and was really, doing his thing. And I just remember that I would get rides from him from place to place to place. And again, one of my teachers told my mom about him and was like, hey, he's not a good influence on Basil, and they don't need to be hanging out. And so my mom told my dad, had a big blowout fight about it. I'm like, I'm just getting a ride, like just chill. I'm just getting a ride. I'm going to here, there. It's not a big deal. And he's like, no, if you're in the car, you're doing other things, and you're gonna be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you just need to do something different. So I'll never forget. There was a basketball game that he was supposed to be taking me to, and my dad and again had another big fight. He's like, you need to get on your bike and ride to school if that's what you got to do. He's like, but you're not getting in the car with him. So long story short, I didn't get in the car, and I had to, take my bike to school. And so that evening, the guy that I said was my friend, another friend called him and said, hey, it's a gang shootout at this park. You need to come out here and help us out. So they go to the park, and what they didn't know is an officer got called at the same time from someone else, and the officer was coming on the other side of the hill, coming up the hill. And as the officer approached the top of the hill, my friend shot him and thought he was a gang member. And so he shot and killed the officer. And so there was another friend who was in the car. And that young man got, I think, 30 to 40 years, definitely well, he had 8 felonies, but I think he had to serve 40 to 60 years. And we were young at that time. I mean, I think I'd have been maybe 14, 15. So the other guy who was in the car got like 5, but he was a kind of like an accessory. And I was supposed to be in the car that day. So Jared, that was a moment where I was like, okay. I was like, what I'm doing is like, it's not, it doesn't make sense. And that could have been me. Like that could have been me. And I was like, okay. And people have been, and so another thing you talked about mentors. I started off at the Boys and Girls Club at the age of 9. My dad put me in the program when we first moved from California, and I left the program, the director of the whole program, and I was in charge of about 250 kids and had about 25 staff. So a lot of growth happened in that time. But I first got hired as a junior staff. I think I was 13, 14. I got hired to work with kids, tutor, kind of be their big brother. And I kind of worked and developed all the way through. I became a Youth of the Year for them in 2006, where I represented the whole Boys and Girls Club and went to a state national conference. And they're testing you on, like, I don't know if you're familiar with FBLA, but you got to do some essays, you got to do some speaking and do some different things. And so I kind of became their poster child for, like, how do you get yourself together? And so that program had a huge impact on my life in terms of like getting myself together and getting back on track. And then I just had mentors after mentors during that time who just continue to say, like, now that you're on the right track, you do have leadership, you're shooting in the right direction. And so my childhood mentor, we call him DP, but Demont Perry, he's someone that always was working on a degree. I mean, every time I talked to him, he's working on a certification, a master's. And I just remember we were at a basketball clinic one day, and he said, Basil, you're working at this after school program, but the same kids need you in the school. And you to be able to be a role model and be a true impact. And so they need you. So have you ever considered that? And so that was a huge pivotal kind of conversation we had, which kind of sparked me getting that para job. And then again, you see where I'm at now. And so the job I'm in now, my first degree is in business. And so I never thought I would be an educator. Let me say that. And my professor in my program pulled me aside one day at Eastern Mennonite University. And he said, Basil, why are you, he said, I could get fired for asking you this. He said, but why are you not in an education program, a social worker, or a counseling program? You clearly have a heart for kids. Every time you do a business, SWAT or whatever you're doing, like it's always on an educational program. And I remember looking at him and saying, like, those professions don't pay. And so I don't want to do that. And so at some point, I can't tell you really when, but I realized that both of my passions could emerge. I thought I'd be like a CEO of a Boys and Girls Club YMCA.
Mm.
That was kind of the track I thought I was going to go on. But being in administration is still that business side, but then I still get to meet the heart and needs of me of working with people and working with kids. So that I
Mhm.
think both of my passions collided in that moment when I figured that out.
You got so many cool stories. I mean, like so many like turning points in your life that are like, oh, jaw dropping, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
It's just, it's fun to listen to. Okay. Let's talk about equity just for a little bit more here. I say this a lot. I hope it's okay. You know, here in the Midwest, you know, we sometimes there's some districts, I'm not going to lie, there's some districts in Iowa that are very diverse. Absolutely. But there's a whole lot of whiteness, you know, and we don't know. And if you look at our administrator ranks, they look a lot like me. You know, they
Mm,
don't have the red hair, but but they're a lot of white males. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And
yeah,
white females.
yeah.
So what? For those of us who just don't know, I mean, you've got so much perspective, like, you know how to have those conversations. I could never have those conversations. Where do school districts start? Where would you, if we don't really know, you know, we're trying to do things better. We're trying to understand the perspectives of our students, but a lot of times we're just guessing, you know, we don't know. Where should we start? What would you recommend to a district who's looking to improve their practices around equity?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge question, Jared,
I
right?
feel like you get asked this a lot, so
that
I hope you don't mind me asking
yeah,
you again. But where do we start, man?
you're good, and I hope I could keep it as succinct as possible. But what I would tell you, Jared, is the first place to start is acknowledging that there is an issue that needs to be addressed, and that's just point blank period. Because I think a lot of times we stay comfortable in our comfortableness, right? And so if we don't have to address it until we got to address it, it's okay. And I think I kind of talked to you a little bit about in our pre-conference
Mhm.
that I have spoken, nationally or at schools where it's an affluent school. And I say it could be all white, all black, but let me just, for the sake of this example, all white school.
Sure.
And I've had a principal look at me and say, "Well, we don't have any equity issues here." And that's the first problem, because
Mhm.
this is the place where that culturally relevant pedagogy and conversations could be happening.
Mm.
You may, and look at your data. Some of that data will still speak to there's inequities. Inequities is always just based on race. That's the place to start. But
Mm.
inequities can be gender inequities in the school. It can be academic inequities in the school. It's a lot. That doesn't mean equity doesn't exist there, right? And so I also believe that when you have a school like that, that's a place to have those conversations about, with kids, have courageous conversations about social justice, and allow kids to grapple with what they're seeing on TV, grapple with what they've heard from a friend, grapple with
Mm.
what they are identifying themselves as. Because let's be clear, some of those same kids are also going to be influencers down the road. They're going to
Mm.
be a mayor. They're going to be working with NASA. They're going to be working with different things. And if they've never addressed what they don't know or were presented that, then how will they know, right? I love Dr. Maya Angelou when she says, when you know better, you do better, right? Or you do better when you know better. Like, understanding that when you're giving information, I talked about access at the very beginning. That's a level of access, right? Um, I'll tell you, Jared. My brother and my brother in equity, JT Taylor, and his handle is Purpose Pusher for Twitter. We just did an equity cohort in the last couple of months, and we talked, and we had 4 weeks of intense conversations about equity and how to be able to tackle what we're talking about right now. Jared, I had grown people, right? White women, white men, 40 years old, older, telling me like, I've never, what y'all explained to me, I've never heard. I never knew how to tackle this conversation. I never knew how to call my friend in and say, "Hey, that was racist," or "Hey, why did you do what you did? Can you help me understand that?" And then you being able to give another side to that quarter, like having those conversations. Because what I always say is silence is not an option. When you allow something to happen and you're a bystander and you didn't address it, your silence said it was okay, right?
Mm.
When you have a kid who, may not, it can be access, they need to take an end of course test and they happen to not have a Chromebook and that's how they needed to take it. And you tell them, well, you didn't bring a Chromebook, so you don't get to take it today. Why are we not finding another Chromebook in the school for them to take
Mm.
it? Like, why are we saying, well, because you didn't bring this, I'm limiting you from taking this test, which could potentially earn you a credit. You
Mm.
could potentially graduate. Now, you don't let me take it. I'm mad as a student. So then the makeup day, I don't show up because I'm still mad. And now I'm not getting a credit. And 2 years later, when I'm supposed to graduate, this credit that I supposedly needed, I'm now in the balances. I'm not graduating.
Yeah. Yep.
Someone easily could have said, let's just get this kid a Chromebook. And so you have minuscule inequities that happen, Jared, with the microaggressions, and then you have big political things that happen at the district level, right?
Mm.
And so there's, again, I can talk about this on a whole other podcast all day, but some of the things you got to do as a board, as a superintendent, as building leaders, is have those school improvement conversations. What are our policies at the district level that is happening, and you have that conversation with your directors, your assistant soups. You start looking at some of your policies, right? Don't just hire a director of equity and say, well, we're good,
Mm.
because I see that happen a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Districts will hire a person of color to be in that role, and a box is checked because now we're equitable. That's half the battle, is that position. Now the real work begins,
Mm.
right? So look at it at the district level, and then once you've done that work and have those trainings and bring in a consultant like myself, how people can do equity audits of the school district, then you bring that learning down to the leadership level, building level, and start to have some of those conversations, because now they need to give it to their teachers, they need to give it to their specialists, because impact is seen at the student level, and we got to have that impact done at the student level. Jared, last thing I'll say, you wouldn't imagine that I've went across the nation talking about equity. I go to divisions who spent 3 years, 4 years working on a 45-page equity plan. It's the best plan. It has a bow on it. It's great. And then I go to a school and say, wow, so tell me how this equity plan is working for Jamal here. And it's crickets. They can't tell me how all that at the middle school high level is coming all the way down and impacting this kid. And they'll say, oh, well, we'll get back to you in a couple of days. We know it's working, but I can't really tell you right now. Again, it's just a plan. It's a plan that's going to sit on a shelf and collect dust. So are we operationalizing equity? That's the biggest thing. And so when I start to do some more consulting, that's what I'm going to be working on, is operationalizing equity. We have to start letting it be a buzzword. Stop doing a one shop top, equity. I would say school convention conference, or bringing a keynote speaker and we're done. Equity is a continual work that takes time, and you have to be intentional to be equitable.
I love everything you said. I just know there's some districts that have that 45-page plan, and they checked off that box with the equity director, and then no practice has changed.
Yes,
And I just like how you're just being really honest about it. You mentioned the consulting. If people are, I love what you're saying. If people are listening and they're like, I want this guy. So are you actively looking for clients for consulting work, or where are you at with that?
absolutely. So I will be completely transparent. I actually started an LLC called Equity Elevation, LLC, and so I started at the beginning of this year. I'm not truly where I want to be with it, but I've done consulting even before I started the LLC. So the best way to reach me are two ways: directly through Twitter, at Basil_Marin, and again, that's how Jared found me. We're here at the conversation, or through my website, basilmarin.com, and there's a specific tab that asks about me being a speaker, or being a speaker, doing workshops, doing a keynote. I'll be honest with you, the work really the work really resides though in having those workshops, and really get down to the work, and where it's really we're working with the team, because I love keynotes, but you set people on fire and the people are like, oh, that's great, right? And then we
Oh
listen
yeah.
to it on Friday, and we get back Monday and we turn on the lights on the schoolhouse and we're like, okay, what do we do? Like, you got to be with the work, and you got to have a plan. And if I could get my hands on the plan and look at what you're doing and give suggestions and be able to work with you and help you, support you, and it might be a 6 month work, or it might be a whole year work. That's where the real continuity and change is seen. It's not just a one-time situation.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people doing that, where they just bring somebody in one time, and that's not. Yes, to get you sparked up is great, but the work's going to have to be continual.
Mm-hmm. Okay, man, I've had you for 50 minutes already here, so I better get moving on here a little bit. So I just want to know real quick. I asked you before the show, there's a lot of people listening who are curious about getting their doctorate. They're not quite sure if they want to take that. It feels like it's a big, commitment, a lot of time, a lot of money. What, you just recently got it. When did you get your doctorate? It wasn't too long ago, right?
Yes, I defended October.
Awesome, man. Congrats.
Yeah.
Congrats. That's great. So what advice do you have for somebody if they're thinking about going that next step now that you're freshly out? What would you say to them?
This is what I'll say, Jared. I'll be honest with anyone listening. If you even have the inkling of like, I want to do a doctorate, or if somebody's planted a seed, or you've kind of been sitting on it, you can do it. I'm telling you, if I can do it, you can do it. I will be very transparent. I hate school, like reading and the writing and just the process of it. You have some people who, if they could have all the funding in the world or fellowships, they'd have 1,000 degrees. I was not that person. I've told you all from the beginning of the show, I struggled in school my whole life. So even being in second grade and being on that low reading level, to having my work published and being a part of work to influence the educational system. Believe me when I say I cried on my dissertation day, defense day, because I never would have thought that someone would say like, your work, your words are that impactful that we're honoring you with this today. So I would say, go for it. The first, there's a quote that I love that I had when I came to Atlanta. I went to the Dr. Martin Luther King Museum, and that was an awesome experience. But there was a quote I bought at the gift shop, and the quote says, "Faith is taking the first step, even when you cannot see the whole staircase." And that's how a doctor is going to feel. It's a roller coaster. There's great moments, there's low moments, there's moments you're like, what am I doing? Why am I spending this money? Like you have all these emotions, but what I'll tell you is it's worth it. And one of the words that you use, Jared, is sacrifice. You're going to have to make a sacrifice, because it's a journey that your whole family is going to have to go on. There's going to be times where you miss Thanksgiving dinners. You're there for the meal, but then the after fellowship, you're not there. There's family vacations you got to miss because you got to meet a deadline. There's just things you got to do with sacrifice, but you're then able to be part of a 2% of people who have done something at that high level, and to be able to impact not only K through 12, higher ed, but also the biggest thing, the reason I did it was to impact kids. It's not even about kids walking around and calling me Dr. Marin now for me to have my chest out and saying I'm that. It's to tell a kid, if I get my doctorate, man, you can graduate from high school. It's that I can have a greater impact, because we know the nuances of the educational system. And Jared, I never wanted to get to a table where they told me, man, Basil, you were the candidate, right? But on the job description, it really said preferred doctorate, and we have another candidate, and that person may not have, in my personal opinion, may not have been good as me, but because they had a doctorate, they got hired over me. So I said, I have to eliminate all excuses, and I have to make sure that I can put myself in a place to continue to do what's best for kids. So it is worth, to answer your question, it is worth it. It's if I promise you, if I can do it, you can do it. And it's definitely something that I would say, have accountability support partner, because when you have, the dissertation, it's different type of writing. You're going to wake up some days and say, I have nothing to write today. But if you have accountability partner that says, hey, you said you were going to have 10 pages today, let's at least get 3. Right. And that person kind of pushes you. You're like, all right, I got 3 done today. That was 3 more pages than you had. Right. And so I would just say that for me was the biggest piece, is having that accountability partner and be able to be in the journey with someone else.
I've been seeing on Twitter and Facebook, there's this book that's been going around that I'm like all over the place right now. And it's called 100 No Nonsense Things all teachers should stop doing. And I was scrolling through your timeline, and sure enough, you've got a passage, you got an excerpt in there, a chapter in there. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
So tell us about this book. It's kind of been blowing up, and you've got a section in there. Just tell us what we can expect if we buy that.
Absolutely. Dr. Rick Jeter, him and his team, I think pushing boundaries. I'm sorry if I butchered that your company's name, but he's done some great, phenomenal work, and he had an idea of, let's just get a huge educational project where we get educators from all over to write about things teachers to stop doing. And it was a great project. I just remember him reaching out. Well, he put it out, I think, on Twitter or Facebook. And I remember at the time I was knee deep in my dissertation, and I'm like, man, I can't do nothing else but this. And I just remember thinking, see all the names that were a part of it, and I'm like, man, I gotta get on this project though. Like this is phenomenal, and so now it just got published. And it's phenomenal. But my chapter is stop lowering expectations for students. And that, I mean, that speaks to my whole story, is that I've walked by plenty of teachers, plenty of administrators who thought I wouldn't be anything, and they lowered expectations for me, or thought they needed to, or tried to give me a get out of jail free card when I didn't need it. And that really impacts students, right? One of my favorite movies is Stand and Deliver, and you all have seen it. Y'all have seen, teacher who went to his classroom who had the most perceived worst class ever. They're throwing airplanes, pencils, they're sitting on top of the desk instead of in the desk, and he had his work cut out for him. And by the end of the movie, the kids have really grown on him, had respect for him, and wanted to grow. They did so well, Jared, that the state came in and looked at the test scores because they were so high. They were higher than the honors or AP classes in that school, that they made them retest because they thought they cheated, and they retest and scored higher than the first time. And that just speaks to, students are sponges. They want the bar of excellence and expectations to be raised, and they will raise that level you set for them. But when we set these low bars, we're only doing students a disservice, and again, not giving them the skills to be successful after they've left our care. So I'm a prime example of stop lowering expectations. If Miss Sankson had lowered expectations for me, Jared, she would have got her check and been perfectly fine, handing me a notebook saying, read a chapter every day, checking on me before class ended, and she would have did her job. That's it. And she went above and beyond every day to make sure that I was taken care of, and making sure that I saw more than I saw in myself. So I think that's just the story of me in terms of education. We got to stop watering down the ways for kids to be able to learn, because it's not helping.
So that book is called 100 No Nonsense Things All Teachers Should Stop Doing. So hey, like I said, it's you guys are at the top of the list on some Amazon charts there. So good job contributing on that. Hey, I've had you for almost an hour here. It has flown by. So I'm going to kind of take you to some of our quick hitter closing questions here, and I'll let you share anything else you'd like to. In case you're joining us late, incredible interview, Dr. Basil Marin, down there in Atlanta, Georgia, at Chamblee Charter High School, assistant principal there, just got his PhD from Old Dominion back in October. I tell you what, he's doing some consulting work. He's a keynote speaker. He is just an up and comer here, and you're going to be hearing from him here in the next couple decades here. So, hey, okay. So we just talked about books. What is one book that has greatly influenced your life?
Wow. There's a lot of books, but one of my favorite speakers is Manny Scott. And man, talk about a speaker who makes you feel, who makes you examine and reflect your practices and what you do. He has a book that states, even on your worst day, you can be a child's best hope. And I firmly believe that, because you could be having the worst day ever, and you just giving a kid a smile or a fist bump or whatever. I know we're in COVID now, but that's what used to be my thing. You never know how it's going to bless a child or how it's going to pick a child up or how they'll say, man, they really care about me. You just never know. And so for me, that book has really been life changing and really been my philosophy of education, that we just never know what kids are going through and how your impact can be life changing. Miss Sankson, I spoke about her plenty of times in this podcast, but one thing I'll say is this past Christmas, she had a handmade ornament made for me, and it was a silhouette of an individual in regalia, and in the bottom of it was a scroll that said Dr. Basil Marin, and it said 2020. Jared, that's 15 to 16 years of belief.
Mm.
She's believed in me since ninth grade, and now I'm grown. I'm an administrator, and that belief, like that's what she saw. I don't know about all of it, but she saw levels of greatness way back when, and so that's what I'm talking about. Is you just never know when you plant that seed how it will flourish. And so that for me was a phenomenal book.
Next question. I wasn't in my quick hitters, but I'm curious. Do you have a daily practice? Do you do something at school like that's consistently, or maybe it's once a week or every day, that maybe other administrators don't, that you would say, hey, you got to start doing this? This has been a huge, one of my most successful things I do. What would you recommend?
I would be honest, it's being visible and walking down the halls and just waving at teachers and saying, "Hey, I see you."
Mhm.
You cannot lead from your office. You just can't. And so when the teachers see you, they know you. It's funny because days I'm not there, they're like, "We didn't see you yesterday," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's something I had to take care of." And that's just goes back to relationship and presence and them looking forward to see you, but also they know you're there. Like me just being I mean, you have never met me, but I'm 6'4", like I'm a tall guy, so they can just feel that. And so when that's
Mhm.
missing from them, then they also it's good to know that they missed that. So for me, being visible, being present with your teacher, especially now, they need you more than ever. I know something Bethany talks about a lot. It's just being there, being present, and being who people need you to be. But that's what I would say.
Okay. Okay. Do you, I always ask this question. I don't know if I get great responses because people are just can't put it into words. How do you go about just any tips for building relationships with kids? And I know you've kind of hit on that, but is there any actionable steps that others can take? They hear you and they're like, "Oh, he's just natural talking to kids. He's had the experiences. He just know." But for somebody who's, if you're trying to coach up somebody who doesn't have those skills, what
Mhm.
would you tell them?
Yeah. So the first thing, Jared, I'm gonna say is be genuine. Okay.
Okay.
Kids have this sixth sense of knowing when you're being fake. Okay. Do not go to a conference and they're like, go back tomorrow and do these fist bumps and you're gonna get some great glean of like they're gonna know. They're gonna be like, you've
No.
never done that before. Right. So be genuine because kids need you to be your authentic self. Be genuine. And then secondly, I would say is share those stories with your students that take you off of a pedestal and make you real
Mm,
to them.
mm,
Because like I gave you that story to that young man about how he failed the EOC test, but I also failed a test. And so he's looking at me like it probably was twofold. How are you teaching me if you failed a test? And it probably was surprised, like, how'd you fail a test? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, he was just
mhm,
shocked. Either way, however he went to look at it, it took him back. And so when I told him that, he was like, "Oh, like you have struggles too." Yeah, I do, and I still have them, but I'm trying to overcome and persevere and be resilient as best as I can because I got to be here for you. So,
mhm.
kids, so take yourself off that pedestal and share. Again, I'm not asking you to share your whole life story, but if you have stories that are appropriate for school that give them tangible things for them to be able to see about you, that helps to break down the barriers. If you are a musical person, you know how to play the guitar, you know how to play harmonica, and there's just these cool things, or you know how to ride a unicycle that I'm not gonna say normal, your traditional person doesn't know how to do. Like,
Uh-huh.
bring that to class and show the kids because they're gonna be like, wow, like, okay, like I see you. And the thing is that when we allow kids to see us, Just like we expect them to show themselves to us. You're just modeling how to do that. And once you break down those barriers, kids will be able to give to you. And this is the last thing I'm gonna say, Jared. I see this all the time, but you cannot make a withdrawal from a place you have not made a deposit.
Mm.
And that is so key. You talk about relationships, you got to make deposits. I tell my teachers the first week of school, I don't want to see anything about curriculum, all team building in your class, because I want to see, you got to do things to build community in your class. You got to do things to get kids to know each other, for them to get to know you, and to build community. Because when that kid has a 68 and there's 2 weeks left until the end of the school year, and you're trying to get that kid to care and to do all that, if you've made that deposit, you can pull that kid to the side and say, man, I like, remember your goal. You want to be an astronaut. This is a science class. Science classes are so key in science. And you just remind that kid, and they're like, yeah, you're right. And you're going to have harder courses in college, but we got to get you through this one first. And if you're able to have that connection, they'll be like, you know what? I'll do it for you. And it's not even doing it for you, but that's how they feel, is I'm doing it for you, but they're doing it for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that for me, Jared, has been some of the tools I've used in my work. But I'm saying the biggest thing is you got to make deposits, because kids got to know, they got to know how much you care about them before they care about how much you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, okay. So you've talked, uh, obviously you're excelling in your leadership position. You wrote the dissertation, you're doing some consulting work, you're doing the speaking, you're doing so much. How are you so productive?
Some days
Any
I'm not.
tips? What's your biggest tip, man?
um if my dad always had a saying that if you could do anything you love and not get paid for it, what would it be? Right. And the whole premise of that is doing what you love. Right. And when you do what you
Mhm.
love, it doesn't feel like work. Like right now, you and I are meeting right now. This is a fruitful conversation. It's a rich conversation. If we
Mhm.
were talking about history in a World War II, this podcast would have been 3 minutes. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so
Yeah.
talk about your own personal stories, or you're writing about things that will influence other people, it fuels me. But I'll be honest with you, I've also had to step back and learn when to say no. And that's something I learned and getting better at during this COVID time, because you got to protect your peace, you got to protect your
Mhm.
time, you got to protect who you are, because people want to taste, they want to be able to get in contact with you and expose you, but you got to protect yourself as well. And so I'm getting better at that and learning that. But to answer your question, I love what I do. I love helping people. I love talking about equity. That really fuels me, because that is my story. That was what I went through, and what I want to give people on how to be able to do what they do better.
What? Okay. The writing? Let's talk about that for a second. I'm trying to see if I can pull out any habits that you've picked up. You said like some days you didn't. Some days you got 3 pages out. Some days you didn't get. Any writing tips, or when you have to get, when you need to sit down and do some work,
Yeah.
is there any tips that you've picked up, maybe that before the doctorate that you didn't have, that now have been instilled, that now has become a habit for you?
Yeah. So I would say the biggest thing, and again, it depends on your personal situation, is you
Mm-hmm.
got to find a sacred time or a quiet place.
Okay. Okay.
If you got a house that's always jumping, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
might be really early in the morning, or it might be really late at night. But you
Sure.
got to find that, right? But for me, I love music, and so whether it's some jazz, whether it's some blues, I had that in the background. It could be
Mm.
gospel, and I just had that in the background pumping. And that might be a song I played, for 3 hours. It's the same song, but it's got me excited. And once I got into my groove, like, that helped me, right? I'd also say, depending on what type of writing you're doing, like, having an outline really does help.
Okay.
Because if you're
Okay.
writing just a free write, I mean, it's free writing and it's great, but you like, my chair, if she was here, she'd tell you, or he have a roadmap, have a roadmap. And so you
Mm.
kind of got to know your roadmap. But sometimes it is best just to be free flowing and have wide open thoughts, because then you could channel it down later. So it really depends. If you're at a part of your writing where you don't know where you're going, free flowing is great. But once you have that roadmap, then I would say, map out what you want to do. Or you're telling yourself, I really want to work on chapter 1 today. Then the writing you're dedicating that day is chapter 1. There were some days where I said, I can't do chapter 1 today. I got to work on chapter 2 because this is depressing me that I'm still in chapter 1. So I start chapter 2 just to give myself a little bit motivation. But then I said, okay, I got to come back to chapter 1, right? So just having those tips. But I would say, find your happy place. If it's your music that gets you going, find your right track. Get your quiet place. Again, sacrifices. If you got to go to the library to be able to have a quiet place, if you got to go get yourself an Airbnb, like, do what you got to do, because it's going to pay off in the long run. But talking about it and not doing it will get you nowhere.
So I'm going to ask like a dumb question. Okay. I don't know anything about jazz. I really don't. For those people who don't know anything about jazz who are listening, who's the one, if I'm going to Spotify right now, or if I'm going to Apple Music, who do I got to listen to?
That's a good question. And I'm gonna tell you honestly, I didn't listen to a particular artist. I just like instrumental jazz. So I'm more of a blues. So partly why I'm not gonna say individual is because the words would like sometimes trip me up, right? Especially if I'm trying to think.
I like that.
And so let me clarify that. Having instrumental just kind of in the background playing takes you to this place. I can't explain it, but it takes you to this place and the cymbals are going, and it allows you to free flow. That's me. There was times I could have words being played, but there's times where I'm like, I can't do words today. So, but you got to know, right? But if you have your song that's your anthem or your pump song, and you got to kind of listen to that before you start writing, do that. But I knew for me, instrumental took me to a place because the words would just trip me up.
We're speaking the same language, man. I write. I just submitted a book. It's going to be published here soon. And I have listened to. I love music in the background, but it's got to have no words.
That's right.
We're totally on the same wavelength there, man. I completely agree. So I appreciate you clarifying that for me. You got so many goals. I'm going to ask you 2 questions about goals. Okay. What's your biggest goal right now? And then where do you see yourself, if you don't mind me asking? And if you're like, you know what, some people don't like sharing their long-term goals, which you don't need to go there if you don't want, but 20 years from now, where do you see yourself at?
Yeah. So do you want me to answer that one first?
Either one, man. I would love to hear both. You can, okay. However you want to take them.
Yeah. My immediate goal right now is to be a building principal. That's my immediate goal. Again, I've been assistant principal for 4 years. I've loved what I've done, but I think I'm ready to take that seat and really to be able to impact and be able to utilize my ideas for moving a school in terms of school improvement and student achievement. So that's like the immediate goal. 20-year goal, I would say that was one of the reasons why I got the doctorate. My goal is to be assistant superintendent or superintendent of a division, to be leading a school and really taking these ideas at a district level.
Everything you're saying, man, I can see it. I can see it. You mentioned the policies. That is one of the coolest things about being a superintendent in my mind is you have the ability, you're at that level where you can really look at the policies you've got and you can make sure your philosophy can. It takes some time. I'm not going to, I've just been in this position for 3 years, but eventually over time, you keep, you prove yourself to the board, you prove yourself to the people, and then you can really start impacting policy. And it just, I can see you so doing that. That's awesome, man. How about, do you want to teach at the university level at some point with that or way down the road, or hasn't crossed your mind?
So it's funny you asked that because one of our classes when we started the PhD, we had to write down, I think, our 3, 5, 7-year goal. And one of my goals was to be an adjunct professor. So be it, I guess I kind of could take 2 tracks, educational leadership or special education, because that was one of my backgrounds. So I think I will lean more towards educational leadership. But I also know that special education is a kind of it's a specialized area, and so having that skill set also might be something that will allow me to get into the higher ed space, being that everybody has a leadership credential, it seems like. So
yep. Well, hey man, if you count in the time that we were not connecting on Zoom, we're having our time. I've had you for 2 hours, man. So I need to, I'm so fat. You have such a great story. I mean, this has been, I'm not just saying this, one of my favorite episodes. Yeah, just, you got it, man. You got it going on. And, is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure that you shared?
No, I was excited about these questions that we asked today, and it got to the heart of my story and my beginnings, but then also where I am now. And so again, if districts are looking for, schools are looking for someone to come in and look at the equitable practices, or they want to start having those conversations, because that's where a lot of people are too. They just need to have the start, right, and be able to recognize, how do we move this work, how do we look at what we have already, and know that equity, like I said, I'm gonna keep saying it is a progression. So you can't just bring someone in all of a sudden in a year, you have all these things going off. Like, you got to pick one or two or three things you want to focus on. If you have a laundry list of 25 things, you already messed up, because you got to do those two or three things with fidelity, get some of that motivation, see what's going to happen, and then continue to move upon that and grow upon that. So I would love to do that with any of your people, or just have a conversation about leadership in general. But this has been a awesome conversation, and a podcast I
Good.
definitely won't forget.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it. Again, you just no I don't know if you can see this, but I usually write down like my words that like catch like the phrases I like, and I wrote down
Yeah.
like 20 phrases for you. I'm just like, man, this guy's got so many cool things. Take yourself off the pedestal, the double dutch, the SEL does not have any age limits. I mean, it's just so many cool things. So, I appreciate it. And you mentioned your website on Twitter. Is that probably the best places to track you down at?
Yeah, so again, at Basil_Marin was Twitter, and then also again basilmarin.com are the best ways to contact me, to get a hold of me. I think my email as well, as I'm on LinkedIn and different things, but definitely I'm pretty accessible. So if you reach out to me, and we'd love to start the dialogue, I'm open.
Okay, man. Well, hey, I will let you go at 7:30 there in Atlanta. So it's getting late. I'll let you get going. But hey, I really appreciate it, man. You're doing awesome things. And let's keep in touch. You're okay.
Thank you, Doc. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.